Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Katie Woodley, the Natural Pet Doctor. This is our weekly update for COVID, critters, and coffee. It is June 20th, 2020. So today, it's all about nutrition. Have you ever looked at the back of a bag of dog food or cat food and wondered, what the heck does this mean? Especially when we're looking for higher protein diets. You turn it around, you see the percentage, and you assume that a high number means that there's a lot of protein in it, right? Who's been there? I know I have. And then also, you're looking for carbohydrate content, but you never see it on the back of the bag. Have you ever noticed that? So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go through some exercises. So I hope you guys are ready to join in and do some calculations with me. So what you can do, grab a pen and paper, because I'm gonna go through a simple calculation that you can do to actually look at dry food and wet food and truly be able to compare them for protein percentage, fat percentage, to see, is this something I really truly want to feed my pets? So that's going to be one part, okay? The other parts we're going to talk about, and we're going to start with our ingredients. And I've got a few bags of food and a canned food with me. It is all cat food because I only have cats right now. And we may see one of my cats destroy everything because she sees all the food out. So if you see that happening in the background, just ignore. It'll be entertaining. But we're going to talk about ingredients and how to look at the label and the ingredients that are in that pet food and how to actually analyze it to see, will this help my pet? So, and of course, I'm here to answer your questions. So send your questions, post them. We'll get through those also. If you have questions about pet nutrition, looking at labels, what does this mean? And because there's a lot of crazy things that go on in the pet food industry that can make foods look a lot better than they truly are. So let's start with ingredients. So have you ever wondered like the difference between like meat? So if you see chicken versus a chicken meal, and this is a way for companies to showcase that chicken is the #1 ingredient. That's what we want to see. Like they know that consumers want to see that on the label, or a meat, whatever meat it is. They want to see that that's first versus a grain or corn or other things. We don't want to see that. So they know that. So when we look at the back of a food bag, so I have one here, and let's see. So first ingredient says chicken. So I'm like, okay, that's awesome. Like that's meat. I want to see meat for my pet, right? That's what we're supposed to see. However, the next ingredient on this bag is cracked pearl barley, and then corn gluten meal, brewer's rice, and then pork fat. So now I'm like, okay, so chicken is the first ingredient. The thing with chicken listed by itself, not as, this is for cats and dogs, so Ziggy, so both. This is overall for pets, reading a pet food label. So you can take any bag or canned food and look at the label, and this is the same for all pets. So that's a great question. So when you look at, for chicken, chicken means that it's undehydrated. It is 75% water. So then what happens, especially we're making a kibble diet, we're going to have to dehydrate it. It's extruded into kibble form, so the moisture is removed. We're removing 75% of that content. Now we're only left with 25%. So, in that example I just read off on the back of that bag, chicken is not #1 because those ingredients are listed by weight. So this is a trick that the companies will do to show that meat is the first ingredient. Now, meat meal. So we don't want to see meat meal because we need to see what type of meat is that. So we always want to see the meat be defined in the food. So companies that tend to have lower cost food, so cheaper food, they'll add fillers, other things. What they'll do is they'll just label it as meat. The problem with that is that they can change that meat source at any time. So it's a way for them to be able to source cheaper proteins. That could be anything. That could be horse. That could be cow, pig, whatever type of animal. So you always want to see the meat being defined on that labeled ingredient or on the label. The other thing is with meat meal, so chicken meal. So that would be something that is already dehydrated. So if you see chicken meal, the first 5 ingredients, that's already has that 75% water removed. And so it's going to be a higher concentrate of the actual protein. So if you see that first, probably is truly that weight. It probably is higher than those other ingredients. So yes, and definitely. So derivatives, so slaughterhouse, we talk about slaughterhouse waste. So most pet foods, what they're doing is they're taking the animal products that aren't being used in the human side. Those are the things that are left over for pet food. So that can be a range of diseased animals, animals with cancer, animals that are injured or hurt. There's all sorts of things that can go into pet foods. That's where using brands that are doing things right are really, really important when we're using processed food. Now, this is not meant to scare, it's meant to inform, because there are good pet food companies out there doing things right, but we need to be aware of what's going into the food, right? The other trick on the backs of bags, and I'm going to use the same one because they did such a great example of what we call ingredient splitting. And so when we see ingredient splitting is the way for them to be able to get potentially cheaper like grains into the higher, like spread out so they're not number one on that pet food label. So remember, we have chicken, so that's 75% water. So once we remove the water content from it, we only have about 25% left. That's a problem. So really, it's not number one on that list because remember, the ingredient list is labeled by weight of those products that are in the food. So when we have different grains, so let's take corn. You can break up corn into all the individual constituents that make up corn. And what it does now is it splits it up by weight. So it looks like there's a less percentage of it in the actual pet food. So on this example, so like cracked pearl barley, we have corn gluten meal, brewer's rice. So it's not too bad, but then we keep reading. And we get pork fat, chicken meal. So that'd be the dehydrated meat, whole grain corn. And then it goes into the actual like synthetic supplements to balance it. So the minerals and the vitamins. So that food is what my senior cat was sent home with for us when we adopted him. And I knew right away looking at that food, I'm like, I'm not going to feed it. And does anyone here have a guess of like, is this a normal food or is it a prescription food? I'd love to hear what you guys think based on that description. So full of all sorts of tasty things for a cat, remember that. So cats are obligate carnivores. They need protein in their diet. They will not eat, well, some will, but typically they don't eat fruits and vegetables. And if we fed fruits and vegetables to them solely, that's not a balanced diet. They're not going to do well. They're not going to get the taurine. They're not going to get the things that are essential amino acids from their food that their body can't make if they're on like a vegan or a predominantly plant-based diet. And so that's really important when we look at these meals, especially for cats. Are there good sources of organ meats? Are there meat sources? What is actually in that food? Is it full of fillers? Is it full of cheap pea proteins that are replacing the grains but aren't actually utilized by the body? They combine with taurine, they can create DCM. There's all sorts of issues. So definitely looking at those labels, reading the ingredients and keeping in mind, is it chicken? Is it chicken meal? Is there ingredient splitting going on? There's other ways that pet food companies also will split up ingredients, or they'll put things like, there's little tricks that they'll do to kind of trip up the consumer so that it keeps you guessing on whether or not this pet food is good. So grab your pens and paper if you're still with me. And because what I want to do next is I want to go through how you can actually compare different pet foods. So this is going to be different dry foods, but also comparing dry to canned foods, because a lot of us are looking for higher quality protein diets for our pets. And for good reason, our pets need those proteins. They're not going to go and utilize carbohydrates first for their energy and to help them with their overall body health. They're going to utilize proteins and fats first. So this is really important to remember. For feeding high carbohydrate diets, there are a time and a place for certain conditions. Yes, so if your dog's prone to pancreatitis, we don't want to feed a high-fat diet because that can irritate the pancreas even more. Sometimes if we're in later stages of kidney disease, we're going to lower the protein levels. However, most of the time we need to be feeding a high-quality bioavailable protein diet, and then also the fat, because that's what our pets utilize. I think a lot of people don't realize that. And so being able to calculate out the fat and the protein content in that food is very important, because it can be really tricky to look at the back of a bag and see and compare two different types of foods, because for one, they're going to have different calorie contents. And then also it's going to be listed differently on the bags of food, and whether or not you're dealing with a dehydrated diet or a canned diet, because the moisture content's also going to be different. So that's going to affect the percentage. So if you have any food by you, grab it. Otherwise, just take notes and then go and take a look at your dog and cat's food and the ingredient list. So I'm going to start with the canned food, because we always assume, okay, canned foods, lower carbohydrates, right? However, when we're looking at certain things, so we're looking at what's on the back is the guaranteed analysis. And so you'll see on this canned food, so this little cat canned food, it says guaranteed analysis, crude protein, it has a percentage, crude fat has a percentage, crude fiber has a percentage, and moisture. You won't see carbohydrate on there. The way that you can calculate out carbohydrate, and this isn't super important, the proteins and the fats are going to be more important, but you would just take all those numbers, add them up, subtract it from 100, and that's going to give you your percentage of carbohydrates. So that's a good way if you want to see, okay, is the carbohydrates high in this food or is it medium? And there's different ranges. So I'm going to give you those ranges right now, okay? So carbohydrates, a low carbohydrate diet is going to be less than 50 grams per megacalorie. So this probably doesn't mean anything yet. Don't worry, we're going to get there. A moderate is going to be 50 to 90, and then high is going to be greater than 90. So work out, if you want to know what the carbohydrate base is, you can calculate that by subtracting. Now, okay, guaranteed analysis. Let's say I was going to just look at this. I'm in a store and I'm like, okay, is this a higher protein diet? Is this good for my cat or my dog? This works for either, remember. So I take this and I'm like, this only has 12% crude protein in it. I'm like, that kind of sucks, right? Like for a cat, really? I thought I wanted over like 30, 35 at least. And then I grab a bag of food. I'm like, oh my gosh, the crude protein, it's 40% in the dry food. Of course I'm going to buy the bag, right? Oh my gosh. I never thought like the dry food was higher in protein concentration. So these would be the things that would go through my head just comparing these numbers, right? This is a common mistake that pet parents make when we're just looking at the guaranteed analysis. So here's the thing, and this is how you're going to be able to compare different diets, canned, dry, dehydrated, to see how they truly compare to each other so on a gram per kilocalorie basis, okay? So if you haven't already, grab that pen and paper. Okay, so what you're going to do, so you have this percentage, right? This is looking at the guaranteed analysis. So my protein is 12%. So let's work it out for this can, okay? So 12%. What you're gonna do is you're actually gonna add 1.5% to that number. So we have 13.5%. And then the next thing we're looking for is we're looking for the kilocalorie, on here it says ME, metabolizable energy, per kilo. So this is the calorie content, and you're gonna find it, it's usually right underneath, or this one's on top of the guaranteed analysis. So you can see, I show it, it might not show, but it's right at the top. And then this is the guaranteed analysis right here. And so what we do is we have 13.5 and we divide it by the calorie content density per 10,000. So This is 829 kilocalories per kilo. All I do is it's 0.0829 because it's per 10,000. So stay with me. I know this is a bit of math on a Saturday morning. So when I do that, 13 and a half divided by 0.0829, what I get for the protein content of this canned food is 162 grams per kilocalorie. Okay? So let's just keep that. That's pretty high. So that makes sense. So when I look at 12%, that sucks. Yes. But that's not the actual amount of protein. So when I take a bag of food, so let's take this Stella and Chewy's, awesome brand, by the way, love them. So their crude protein is 40%. So we add 1.5%, so 41.5. And then what we do is we divide it by, so the kilocalories per kilo in this bag of food is 3,900. So it's going to be 0.39. So 41.5 divided by 0.39. And what we get is 106 grams. So now we can truly see that the canned food has higher protein content per kilocalorie. So we're actually comparing it on a similar basis rather than looking at that percentage and being really confused and comparing the two. So I went to this other food too, one I'm not a big fan of. And so what I did, crude protein, so 32%. I was like, oh, it's got high protein, right? Like, that's okay. It's above 30%. However, when I did that calculation, so this has about 4,000 kilocalories per kilo. So I divide 41.5, because you add 1.5%, divided by the amount of calories, so 0.4, I get 82 grams of protein. So when we compare these, so this brand, which is prescription food, to Stella and Chewy's dry food, Stella and Chewy's has over 20 grams more of protein in that food per kilocalorie. Huge, right? Especially when we're looking at our cats and feeding them an optimal high protein diet. So this is something that you can do. It's the same for calculating your oil, so your fats. What are the fat content? Because if we're looking at, we have a dog that's high energy, is healthy, we want to put extra weight on them or feed them optimal proteins and fats, we can calculate out and compare it. So I did that with these 3 diets, and with the Tiki Cat canned, so we've got 41 grams of fat. With the Stella and Chewy's, we've got about 43 grams of fat. And then the prescription food, we have about 45 grams of fat. So they're all about the same. Now the fat is going to increase the palatability of that food. So that makes it more tasty to the pets. Usually when we get higher fat diets, it's tastier. So sometimes what we'll find is these over-the-counter dry foods, they may be really high in fat content because it's making up for the poor quality of the proteins that they have in them. So go through this simple exercise. It took me like a few minutes to do, and go through and find the ingredients and look at the ingredients, look at the percentages and the guaranteed analysis, and then calculate out everything. So typically for some rough ranges for your proteins and your fat content, your proteins are going to be a moderate protein diet is going to be between 60 to 90. Greater than 90 is a high protein diet, and then low is going to be less than 60 for your protein content. Your fats, they're going to be a high fat diet above 50, between moderate fat diet between 30 to 50, and then a low less than 30. So I have a great question I want to answer, because we are talking a lot about nutrition, and we have a webinar coming up on DCM, so heart disease being related to grain-free diets. And let me read the question out loud. Have you read the article about specific pet food brands that were named for being related to canine heart failure? Not sure I can mention the brands here, but they were given by the FDA. That's a great question. And the thing, so this actually was released, I think it was 2-3 days ago. So we were going to talk about that, because it's interesting when we go through those brands and the cases, a lot of cases were being listed as having DCM when they heard a murmur, and they weren't actually investigated for DCM, which is really scary because we can't just general label everything and then say all grain-free diets are bad, because that's not the case. And so what was happening, so DCM is a heart condition where the muscle wall becomes really thin and it can't pump the blood. These dogs go into congestive heart failure and they can die from it. It's very, very serious. And what they were thinking at first, so taurine is an essential amino acid. So dogs can make it, cats cannot. However, we're not seeing the DCM problem in cats. It's only being seen in dogs. And what they were finding is a lot of these dogs were on grain-free diets. And so they were assuming that taurine was low in these diets, or there's something with those pea proteins binding the taurine or affecting the way that the taurine is metabolized in the body, and it was causing it to be low. But a lot of these dogs actually have normal levels of taurine. So that's where some of the metabolizing of there's a lot to it actually. So we're going to be talking about that in our webinar, but this article they just released, they looked at over 150 case reviews and found that there was no link with grain-free. So I'm going deeper into that before we do our webinar on the 30th, because we're going to be covering that, because that's really important, because there were a lot of holes, and it was a case review. It wasn't actually analytic research that was done to showcase how grain-free diets led to DCM. Yes, there are certain deficiencies, and when we take a pea protein and add that to the diet in the past few years, which a lot of companies were doing to make them grain-free and follow that fat in the human side, we can potentially have a lot of issues. However, we're finding that when we're feeding, so raw diets, home-cooked diets that have organ meats and the actual nutrients and organs that are supposed to be in there, the dogs don't develop DCM. So that's something that we're going to go into a lot more with our webinar versus just here. But I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a huge thing about, it's scary. Like grain-free, we don't want our dogs to develop heart disease and heart problems. And yes, there are foods on there that I would still feed on that list. Now, that's where we want to look at the first 5 ingredients, okay? And so what are those first 5 ingredients if we're feeding a commercial diet? Are they, lamb, for instance, is one that potentially has some issues with the metabolizing taurine. So if we see lamb, if we see pea proteins, if we see legumes, so things like chickpeas, and those are all predominantly within that first 5 ingredients, I wouldn't feed that diet. And that's something that I think about when I'm formulating home-cooked diets also is, okay, are we using lamb, lamb's a good protein to use, but we also need to be careful for combining it with legumes, chickpeas, things like that, potatoes. There's less evidence of the potatoes being a problem. And if we're doing that, we can supplement taurine. Taurine is very safe. It's non-toxic. So we can supplement high doses and be okay with it. I don't recommend that. I mean, I recommend doing a balanced diet, making sure that the food is optimal. But if you're concerned, you can supplement taurine. We can also use small amounts. We don't want to go overboard with organ meats, but 10% of diets can be organ meats. So a mixture of liver, kidney, heart, those are all going to have those vitamins, those essential amino acids, and those minerals in them. And they're like nature's multivitamin for our pets. So those are some of the things that we can do if we're feeding a synthetic or a commercial processed diet. But definitely check out those first 5 ingredients and keep in mind, is it chicken or is it chicken meal? Keeping in mind, is it 75% water still? And once it's actually the kibble's extruded, is it now way down on that list of ingredients? So peruse, just like I did with that first brand where, okay, we've got like whole grain corn and all sorts of things further down. And since chicken is the first ingredient, I know that it's going to lose 75% of its content and its weight, which is really important when we're looking at, okay, Like for this food, supposedly my cat had been on it for years before I adopted him, had an upset stomach. That's why he was on this prescription food. And I looked at it and I was like, there's no way this is like good for him. Like it's creating inflammation in his GI tract. Like cats don't eat corn. So what I did is transitioned him onto foods that have, so this canned food has chicken and quail egg, chicken liver, chicken gizzard, chicken heart. So I know that it's going to have more vitamins, more minerals. It's higher protein for him. Yes, he has kidney disease too. Low protein isn't always necessary or helpful for cats that are in early stages of kidney disease. That is something to be aware of. Now, every pet is going to be different, so you need to assess that with a nutritionist, with your veterinarian, to make sure that is the right thing for your pet. However, for Taz, he needs muscle on him. He needs muscle mass. He has heart problems. He has kidney problems. He needs his taurine. He needs organ meats. And so he's done so well. He has not had a single bout of loose stool transitioning off of a prescription food that was specifically for his digestive issues that we have not seen by feeding him a more species appropriate diet than corn. Because remember, cats are obligate carnivores. Dogs tend to be more omnivorous, so they will eat proteins, they can scavenge. However, remember, they're built to draw their energy from fats and proteins first. They can utilize carbohydrates, but that's not their number one go-to. So that's why we want to make sure they have great sources of protein in their diet. What other questions do you guys have? So one of the other things I brought up, I use also some freeze-dried food. So freeze-dried is really common for feeding dogs and cats, and it's actually a really great source. So if you can't feed raw, freeze-dried is like the next step down, and is really good because when I'm going to read this ingredient list to you guys, because there's so many good things in it. And the reason why there's a lot of chicken is because my cats are picky and they like chicken. And so they do okay on it. Chicken's fine. If you have pets that have a lot of inflammation, so if they have allergies, they're hot, chicken can be more warming to the body energetically. So we can also look at foods from a food therapy standpoint and an energy standpoint, because all of these things have different energies to them. So chicken is more warming. So if your pet has heat, doesn't tolerate heat, you want to avoid chicken. You want to use more cooling proteins. Those are going to be your fish. Beef is neutral. Turkey is cooling. So turkey and chicken are not the same. A lot of people think they are, but you can use turkey. So if I'm making diets for cancer patients that are really hot, have a lot of inflammation, I like using turkey. So that's something to be aware of also. So this dehydrated or the freeze-dried food has chicken, chicken necks, chicken gizzards, salmon, chicken livers, and then it has organic kale and lots of organic vegetables, and the cats love it. It's a great way to help them get some other nutrients too, since my cats are weird and don't like eating real meat or even like raw food or anything like that that a typical cat would like to eat. And it's because they're older. They've had 9 to 11 years of eating whatever it is that they were eating. So there's a time and place for everything, and we just adapt to what's best for them and work around that. So does anyone have any other questions about nutrition for their dogs or their cats this morning? I hope you found that helpful. So going through, take a look at the backs of the dog food bags, the cat food bags, the canned food, and see what those protein contents are, calculating it out so you can truly compare it rather than looking at the guaranteed analysis and the percentage. Okay, perfect. I have another question. Any major differences between barf for dogs and barf for cats, and why can they or can they not eat the same? Thank you. All right, so barf, when I say barf, it's not me vomiting, it's the bone and raw food diet. So that's a common thing. So biggest thing with when we're feeding raw food and bones, so there's advantages and then there's disadvantages. When we're feeding whole bones to pets, some of the things that can happen, so some of the disadvantages, they can get esophageal foreign bodies, so they can choke on the bones if they're too big, or they bite them and have a big section of bone and it gets stuck. It can also cause slab fractures on the teeth. So especially we call them carnassials. Those are those big chewing teeth in the back of the mouth. So a slab fracture, what it does is it shears off the enamel off of the tooth. And so that can happen also when we're feeding bones. So the other thing is the worry about E. coli and Salmonella risk. So our pets are really safe against those diseases. The problem is we need to make sure we're cleaning the bowls and the environment and managing it like we would if we were cooking raw chicken, because we are sensitive to those things. We can develop E. coli poisoning, Salmonella poisoning. So if anyone in the household, like if you have young kids that might get into the bowls and touch where the dog's at, or the dog eats and then licks your kid in the face, that is a risk for E. coli or Salmonella. Also, if you have immunocompromised people in the house, you have elderly, their immune systems might not be as strong. I don't recommend feeding a raw diet. So the other way you can make it a little bit safer for them is you can actually grind up the bones, or you can buy the commercial raw foods that are already pre-made into the right ratios and have the vitamins and minerals already added in, so it's balanced. That's the biggest thing I see people make a mistake with, is they just put down like meat and maybe a bone for them to chew on, but are they getting everything in the right ratios? Are they getting those essential amino acids? So a lot of people don't end up giving enough bone. And so what that means is their calcium is usually really low. And if you're feeding just muscle meat and vegetables, their calcium is going to be too low. So dogs and cats, especially dogs, have higher calcium requirements than people do. And so we need to ensure they're getting calcium supplements, either eating the actual bone, it's ground up, or they're chewing on it and actually ingesting it safely, or we're adding in other sources like calcium carbonate, or we can crush up eggshells and add that in based on your pet's body weight and the amounts that they require. So dogs and cats, they can be fed these diets. So cats can do really well on a raw diet. They are, remember, obligate carnivores, so they do really well with meat-based diets, making sure that we're adding in the bones and things like that. Cats can be harder to make a homemade, well-balanced diet, because if we're not adding enough taurine or other essential amino acids, they can go blind. There can be all sorts of issues. So you need to make sure you're working with someone, not just getting a recipe off of the internet, because there are good sources on the internet, and then there's also a lot of really bad things out there that can harm your pet. So I hope that answered your question. But I'm a big fan of feeding real food. So you can also, you can cook the food too. So a home cooked diet actually has a lot of benefits to it also. And there's studies that showcase how the bioavailability, so the digestibility, the amount that's absorbed in the body, they're actually not too different from a raw versus a cooked diet. And now for some dogs that have severe allergies, so say they have like a chicken allergy, raw protein versus cooked protein, it changes the way the structure of the protein is. So some dogs will actually do a lot better with raw. So we'll see case examples of those. So people say my dog did so much better on a raw diet versus either a kibble diet or a home cooked diet. And that could be something that's coming into play for that pet. So we keep those in mind. Remember, every pet's an individual, right? And we're the only profession that recommends feeding like the same food throughout their entire life. It's crazy. So we have to look at each pet as an individual and what's the most optimal diet and the best thing for them, and figure that out. And we can do that. That's the thing I love most about my job, is that we can look at your pet and figure out, what do they need? Where are they at? Are they healthy? Do they have any disease conditions? And how can we use food as medicine? So I hope you guys all found that really helpful today. Thank you for joining in. I know it was kind of long at the beginning going through some of the calculations, but it's so important to inform ourselves on how to look at the food bags and how to assess and be able to compare different brands and different diets on a similar basis, rather than just guessing on the guaranteed analysis and looking at percentages, because it's not apples to apples. It's like apples to like baseballs at that point. So different. But now you can use this tool to assess your foods. And make sure you check out our webinar that we're doing on the 30th, so Tuesday. It's going to be awesome. And I'm so excited because we just had that paper that was just released showcasing that grain-free diets might not be linked. So I'm looking forward to diving into that the next week and incorporating that into my webinar. You can register for that webinar at my website, thenaturalpetdoctor.com. If you need help with your diets, don't be afraid to reach out. We do offer nutritional plans for your pets. So hope you have a fantastic weekend. This is Dr. Katie Woodley, the Natural Pet Doctor. Take care.
Hey pet parents, it's Dr. Katie. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, can you do me 2 simple favors? Number 1, share it with someone else. And number 2, subscribe to this channel by clicking down below so you can continue to get updates every time I release new videos to help your pet thrive. Also, if you're wondering how your pet can achieve optimal health and listening to our videos made you wonder if this can work for your pet, we have an amazing membership site that can really help your pet thrive naturally by being a part of our incredible community of pet parents like yourself. Maybe you're here because you're tired of not having other options to help your pet live their best life and feel amazing. Or maybe you're here because you feel alone in figuring out how to help your pet holistically. Let's partner together today and take the worry out of caring for your pet so you have many more days to share the joy and love with them. Click the link below to grab a 2-week free trial on our Healthy Paws membership. Look forward to seeing you on the next video. Until then, remember you're not alone in helping your pet thrive naturally and live each day to their fullest potential.